Welcome, everyone. I'm Meg Tasillo. I'm the Vice President for Programs for AAUW, the Arlington chapter. And we always try to have our meetings involve something that is of interest to us in the community and to help us learn as we move along life's path. And we are in for such a treat today to have with us someone who can tell us a lot about the path of life over the last 101 years and not ready for the rocking chair yet. You'll let us know when you are. Still a ways to go. We're here, though, this afternoon to hear Martha Ann Miller share with us from her book, The First Century and Not Ready for the Rocking Chair Yet, and have an opportunity both to hear from Martha Ann, to hear some stories, to hear some history of Arlington, her own history, and then we'll have a question and answer period, and I will walk around with the microphone. Martha Ann asked if I would repeat the question to make sure that she hears us. I don't think we ever have a problem hearing Martha Ann. She's got a powerful teacher's voice, and I'm sure that has held you in good stead for your years as a teacher. So we're going to begin, and I know, Martha Ann, you want to recognize a few people, and you have your microphone all set up there. Would you like to recognize the folks who are important in this whole process?
Well, yes. Is that too loud?
That's fine.
I can hear the echoing. I wanted to first begin by thanking AAUW for all that they have done to help me get this book written. And just to set the stage a little more, they were responsible for taking the picture that's on my book. I was wearing the same thing that I'm wearing today. And that was taken at the National Convention in Washington in 2011. And since then, they've been very helpful from a national, the state, and the local. So that's the first thing of importance for us to know. Oh, thank you. Now, the next thing is that I have three special people with me here today, and they have given the book a lot of loving care, just like I have done it over the years of writing it. The first one is, who is listed as my editor, Marcy Schiller. And Marcy, stand, let us see who you are. And then the two others that worked like a team to get this really printed and ready for printing, and that is Rhonda Lee, who was the graphic arts designer for the book. And she and Joe worked together, but Joe is my niece, but she worked for the Post for 30 years, and her husband did too. And it's been like a team that have worked on the book to get it out in the shape and as it is today. And I just want to give them a credit for a lot that they did, because it was without that I doubt if I'd ever really finished. I think I would have, but maybe not in the same condition as it is today. And according to Meg, I was supposed to start a little bit and tell about how I got started writing the book. And you know, I never dreamed of writing a book until many, many years after things happened. But I started to be asked about on the 50th anniversary of speaking at groups and being there for the film that was made. And even then, I hadn't really gotten the real idea of writing a book. But then I got to thinking about my great-grandchildren and the things that they should know about their ancestors. So that's really when I got serious about writing the book. It's been an interesting century. To me, it's the most wonderful century to have ever lived in, because we went from no telephone, no electricity, no running water, none of these things that you have to have today to operate. And so I grew up on a farm in southern Indiana, and enjoyed my life very much there. And I had a very dear mother who was very patient with me. I had 3 older brothers, and then my girl came along, and Mother could give all her time to me, really, along with everything else she needed to do. But if I wanted to do something, she'd teach me. She was very patient and taught me how to sew with a needle and thread, all those little details. But what really changed my life as much as any one thing was being in the 4-H club working when I was 12 and 13 years old. And by that, if you don't know what 4-H is, that was a farm organization for young people in those days, because there were many different clubs, like the sewing club, the canning club, the baking club, and I always liked to bake, so we had to keep records of what we baked. And if we won in the county fair, then we were supposed to enter in the state fair. And to enter in the state fair, I wasn't even able to go and do that, but I baked the loaf of bread. And another thing we had to do along with exhibiting our loaf of bread was to keep a record of everything we baked, then write a theme about it. So that summer we had hard help on the farm, and I baked a lot of things. And that, I always felt that the quantity of baking I did that summer was what caused that ribbon to be put on my loaf of bread to win the first prize in the state of Indiana. Well, that gave, along with that, was a very special thing that happened. Purdue University gave, the first time, they gave a 4-year scholarship to the winners of the 4-H club that year. So at 13, I won the state prize, got a trip to Washington, D.C., and won that prize, which was 4-year scholarship to Purdue. Well, if I'd never had that, I'd never be where I am today. So that was really a unique thing. And I think with that bit of background, you can ask questions which will direct me to what you would like to know.
A little bit about the school system and the history and your part in that.
The school system?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the school system entered into the book, and there's a whole chapter in the book about working for good schools in Arlington County. But it's hard to believe, but at that time, the public schools in the state of Virginia started in 1868. I think that's right, to at least within a few years. And the plantation owners then always had private tutors for their children. And then people with money would send them to private schools. And most of those schools were religious oriented, started by citizens who wanted their children to have a better school to go to. But the public schools were only for the poor people. And at that time, Senator Senior Harry Byrd was in charge of the state of Virginia. And he believed in pay as you go on everything. But the governor at that time appointed the circuit court judge. Then the circuit court judge appointed an electoral board, and the electoral board appointed the school board. So the schools, the people of the community were very far removed, and the school board was removed from the citizens. Well, when I was married in '37, we moved to Arlington County, and that was when Arlington County was known as out in the sticks. Because not many people from the district really came out here. The main thing they came out here, or some of the people that came out here, were coming out here to go to the gambling places along the river by boat and then go back. They wanted to gamble. Well, this is all leading up to the reason that Arlington had such poor schools. So an article went into the Post or paper, one of the papers. If you're interested in kindergartens, come to a meeting. Well, we were having our young family, and I said, I want to go to that meeting. So I went. It was in the Buckingham Community Room. There were about 50 people came to the meeting because at that time, Arlington was growing. It was growing because people were moving in here to help get out of the Depression years. And these were a lot of young people that were moving in with children. Then the war broke out on December the 7th, 1941. And then more people were coming into Arlington County. And these people had children. And that was what spurred the group on to organize. It became the Citizens Committee for School Improvement. And they soon organized because they saw they'd need to do that to work on good schools. Well, they tried very hard to work with the school board that was in power, but they didn't get anywhere. You know, they'd say, well, how did we get money? One time, Dr. LeBeau put an article in the paper and said, or was it I'm sorry, he didn't put an article in the paper to do this, but he was at one of the meetings of the school board, and they were talking about budgeting for schools. And he said, how do we get money then to start getting better schools? Oh, you have to get 1,000 voters on a petition, maybe. And if you got 1,000 voting names on a petition, maybe you could get it on the November election and see if you could, there's an interest, you know. And at that time, Arlington was mainly farms. And the people that owned the land immediately knew that if they had needed money for schools, they were going to have to pay the bill, pay more taxes. So they were very much against that type of thing. And by the way, too, they didn't have many young children if they owned the land. But then, with that challenge of getting 1,000 names on a petition, our Citizens Committee for School Improvement went to work. And I've skipped a lot of information here because a lot went into it before we went for the names on the petition. We tried and tried to get money, but we couldn't do it. But our group went to work, and they came in with 5,000 names on a petition. You know what happened to that? It went in the school board drawer, office drawer, shut, and that was the end of it. So the group was really getting what do we do? What can we do? They were working together. And I want to say right here that that group of citizens who were working and wanted good schools was such a joy to work together because we had one goal, and that was good schools. And that was, if we went to a meeting and voted on anything, we knew that they'd leave there and they'd be working on what we decided to do. It was not arguing over, well, do we do this? Do we do this? They had a goal, and it was working for it. Well, shouldn't tell you everything that's in the book, but you can read it anyway. We finally, well, I like to tell this story because it's so obvious. My husband was a lawyer, so I said to him, honey, you need to go to these meetings. Let me stay home with the children, and I'll do work on the voters list. So that was how we split up the work, because I could work on the voters list at home on the telephone. But we had two different things going on here. I had organized, and we had somebody in each precinct as a captain of the precinct, and we went to the courthouse and copied every name off the voters list in the courthouse. And 3x5 cards, put those cards in a shoebox, gave them to the chairman of the precinct, and they had that to work from because everybody was called on whose name was on that. If their name wasn't on there and they went by a house that wasn't on their list, then they could say, you need to get your voting and need to get registered to vote. So that was my contribution, was to see that that voters list got developed. We had a Desegregation system before we were finished. That meant little rectangular cards with a space in the middle where the typewriter could hit the Indian paper, I think it was, so the ink would go through, and then you'd put those stencils through a Desegregation system, a machine, and yet we'd address the literature to the citizens, things that they needed to know in order to get the work done. Well, you see, we put out a flyer that we needed to have petitions, names on a petition, and the group could get 5,000 names because we were organized. But then Malcolm came home one night from a meeting, and he said, honey, you got a clean white shirt for me? I said, yes, but it's 1:30 in the morning. Why now? Because I was still up doing the housework, which didn't get done by 10 o'clock at night because I was on the telephone before then. And I said, well, yes. And he says, but why? I said, why now? He says, we're going to Richmond, and we're going to work on getting a bill passed. And all the bill said was, we want a chance to vote in Arlington County on whether we wanted an elected school board or not. It wasn't asking very much. But anyway, it was a simple bill just for Arlington. They did leave for Richmond right away at 2 o'clock in the morning because it took longer than 2 hours to get to Richmond then. They wanted to be down there for breakfast with the representatives from the county, and they were. And they spent the day down there, had the breakfast with the representatives, asked them to introduce the bill, and they said, well, they would introduce the bill, but they didn't think it had a chance of being passed. And I don't know what they did all day, but they were down there. And so in the evening, they were going to say goodbye to the representatives. And the representative said, "We're so glad you came as citizens taking an interest in what's going on in their county." And Drennan said, "And sir, we thank you for letting us be here today, but we'll be down here every day until this bill is passed." Well, that wasn't what they wanted to hear or call. So that's the part, that's written up in the book, how we did go ahead and worked on good schools, worked for good schools, and in 1948, the new school board was elected. And we chose people to run for that first elected school board that knew what they were doing. No one, well, let me interject something else here. The people working for the government were hatched. I don't know if you know what hatched means or not, but that if they work for the government, they're not supposed to be in politics, not maybe working Democrats or Republican. And that meant that they were working as independents. So that was a challenge too, because many of our people that were working for good schools were from out of state, where they came from places that had good schools. Well, it's quite a story to get that elected school board elected to get things going. But in order to involve the whole county, well, I should say here that when we voted on whether we wanted this elected school board or not, it was 80% that voted yes. So that definitely we could go ahead and plan the next step then. But then they were very important that the Citizens Committee involved everybody in the county. So all the different organizations were asked to have people run for the school board. And then they had a nominating convention that was held. And this has always been a very interesting little tidbit. One of the first women to run for the school board was Elizabeth Campbell. Now, Elizabeth Campbell was a dean of women down at one of the colleges in Virginia. And she resigned her job, as a professional woman. She was dean of women. But she married Ed Campbell, who lived here in Arlington, and was active in Democratic affairs. And Ed said to Elizabeth before she went to the convention, "Now, Elizabeth, don't get yourself involved." But Elizabeth confessed that after she sat there and listened to all the things that had been done and was being done for working for good schools, she did allow her name to be as a part of the committee that would run for the school board. And then the Citizens Committee wanted to have people who knew what they were doing. And we had a lot of source of valuable people, for that, because being here near the Capitol. So I could name all the rest of the school board people. But the important thing here, I think, is that they each had their own skill to add to working for good schools. And it was a short time with a lot of humps to get over before we got the good schools. But, it took time to build the first school. It took time to get all the information together. And I think one of the most wonderful things that the school board did at that time, the new elected school board, Bernard Joy, Curtis Tuthill, Colin McPherson, O. Glenn Stahl, these were all in their own skills of knowledge. But they set up committees for each subject. So the citizens that had been working for good schools were the ones that were being asked to follow English, math, science, whatever subjects that were offered. And by the way, there was only half-day sessions for first and second grade before we got into doing anything about improving the schools. And another thing that the people were doing was transporting their students into Western High School in the district because they had much better schools in there than Arlington did. So those are the little details that just come to mind as I'm talking here. But as going back to the committees that were set up, they fed in their information to the school board members because the school board knew that they couldn't do everything themselves. And there's that idea of committees for each subject still exists today, I think. I'm right on that. And that's kept the citizens involved. So the schools went from very poor schools up to one of the best in the nation. And they still are considered near the top and the best in the nation. A lot of people have worked to keep it that way, of course. But after the school board was elected and they were trying to decide what was the best thing to do next, lawsuits were brought against them. And in that fight for better schools, we were listed as communists, foreigners, people to come in would leave the county with a big debt and be gone in a year. Well, we're still here, some of us. Even Walter Winchell went on to the radio and said the teachers were asking the students to go home and ask their parents to work against having an elected school board because that would get schools into politics. So there was a real fight going on there for 4 years. And I think I've said about enough about schools, but I will say this, that a number of years later, I understood that the Democrats were very unhappy with what we were accomplishing in getting an elected school board because it was upsetting their whole control of the state, you know.
Okay.
Thank you. Martha Ann, it's Nancy Joyner. Hi. You look very elegant today. You are the poster person for how to look when you're 101. You look great. I had a question for you. Your later involvement in the efforts to desegregate schools and to have the state change the terrible policy that it set up to deny children public education. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
That was a very interesting time. The principal of the school and the superintendent of schools were both Southern gentlemen. And I just bring that in because Virginia was a resisting state. And a resisting to what? Well, the Supreme Court in 1954 had ruled that all schools in the nation should be integrated. And Virginia and many of the southern states were resisting states. They didn't want to follow the Supreme Court report. And so, and several years after the Supreme Court had ruled this. And by the way, this was not a problem for the northern states because they were already integrated. It was only the southern states that were involved. And so finally, some of the people that worked for good schools in the 40s were people from Halls Hill. Now, Halls Hill's a little black settlement in North Arlington, right up there on Lee Highway, but it was in our school district at Stratford. And Stratford was the first building that was built by the elected school board. So, as I said, the principal and the superintendent were both Southern gentlemen and didn't want to have anything to do with integrating the schools. Well, the school board couldn't do much on its own, but since people in Halls Hill had helped get the elected school board, they brought suit against the county for not integrating the schools right away. And then it took 2 years for the circuit court judge to give them an answer to that problem. And they had to keep nudging the circuit court judge on. They kept, writing letters, doing whatever they could to get an answer. So finally, then, on February the 2nd, 1959, the circuit court judge passed the ruling that there would be 4 black children from Stratford come to Stratford Junior High. And of course, the reason their county where they lived was in the school district for Stratford. So that caused many, many people to get almost taking sides, whether it should be done or shouldn't be done, how it would be done. It was the adults that were concerned about the integrating of the schools. And there was a lot done in preparation for that day. The guidance counselor at Stratford went to the homes, and I really don't know how they chose the 4 black students to come to Stratford that did come. I think that they had 4 come that were good students, so that wouldn't be a problem of discipline and so on. But the principal of the school did ask the teachers if they were willing to teach the black students. And the reason for that was that one teacher had said, "Don't put those niggers in my class." Well, I thought that was an insult for the teachers to be asked that, and I said, of course I would. I thought it would be a privilege to have them come to class. I fortunately had no set thoughts about it because I grew up in a community where there were no black people. So it was, but to me, they were just human beings like everybody else. So that was, I guess, one of the reasons that I was assigned 2 of the students to come to my math class. I was teaching math then. And, but the day that was February the 2nd, that was set for them to come, their parents were gathered in a house right next to Stratford, because they thought sure something drastic was going to happen. And the children walked down Lee Highway and then came in the back doorway, so to speak. It was the furthest away from the main door. And that was down by the shop area. down by the auditorium of Stratford Building. Well, as I recall, they all were brought into my classroom there right next to the auditorium, and then they were taken to the office to be assigned their classes for the day or the next 4 months of school, February, March, April, May, June. So the two and two, they were set in pairs of 2. Now, the principal didn't want to have anything to do with the integrating of the school, so he signed all the disciplinary part and the planning over to Doris Matthews. She was a beautiful assistant principal. She had the respect of the children. The children knew she was strict, but she was fair. And she'd called the 7th graders together and talked with them about it. And she asked the 7th if there were any volunteers in the 7th grade that would escort the children around during the school day, because they didn't know where the bathroom was, they didn't know where the cafeteria was, they didn't know anything about the school, really. And the children readily spoke up and said they would be glad to sponsor them around the school. In the school that day, everything went on as normal. Everything had been worked out so carefully that at least I, as a teacher, did not feel anything unusual. Now, a few of the people in the administrative part of the school, I guess, did have a few things they developed, but nothing of significance. But outside the school, the day that the students came, and even for a week before the day for integrating the schools, the teachers had to be escorted from the parking space into the school. We had to have tickets to show that we were a teacher, and the police would be there to help us go into school. They didn't want anything to happen to any of the teachers ahead of time. But there were, according to the records and what I've been there have been some different figures, but there are at least 120 policemen in the community around and the area and near the school, and the day went along with nothing happening. The parents were as I said, at one of the neighbors' house, some of them that are afraid that something was going to happen wanted to be there. But it wasn't. I mean, it was a wonderful day, and it was due, I'm sure, to all the planning that the people put into having the day go well. An incident had happened when these 7th graders got to 9th grade, and they wanted to have their prom. Well, there was if they had it in the gym, then anybody could come in the class. So that some of the white people got together and they decided to sell tickets for the students to be able to come to a prom that was not at the school building. And one of the students, the teachers, made a mistake and sold a ticket to a black student. Well, what should they do, But Doris called the boy in and explained the situation. And she wrote up, when she wrote up the record of the day, she said we were both crying when he gave the money back and she got the ticket back. Then of course, after the school was integrated, it was like, see, there was 10 years there, 11 years, that we had an elected school board. But the state legislature threw out the elected school board because we integrated the schools. So, like a little punishment, I guess, or something. But anyway, instead of the school board being appointed by, like it was before, it was then appointed by the county board, who was an elected group. Any questions on that?
All right, some hard stories to hear. Other questions?
Good afternoon. My name's Kate, and I'm curious, with all the great things like electricity and telephone and technology that has come along, what do you think is something that has gone missing that should really come back in terms of how much we've advanced this year, but in these years, but something that has really gone missing that people don't appreciate or that we don't have like we used to?
I was able to teach the beginning of computers, and that was an interesting thing to start in 7th grade. But that was about 1962. So when you stop to think about teaching this to 7th graders in early 60s, and here it is, 2013, how far we've come in the technology world. That's just mind-boggling to me sometimes to think. And all I was teaching them then was to set up their little loops, if, then, go to, and then we would telephone in the program that they were writing to the office in the county, which had a computer, and the computer took the space of the size of a room. And now you can carry a computer in your hand and have everything there and far more than you had at that time.
My question is, as a teacher, do you think the size of the class, the number of students in the class, is particularly important? And what size of the class do you think is correct?
Well, my experience was that I had about 20 to 25 in class, and they seemed fine to me. I'd hate to have many more, and it was great to have less, but I think 20 to 25 is, particularly 25 is a good number.
I just have to interject. In my other life, I'm doing boundaries and capacity in the schools, and I always tell families that when I was growing up, I had 56 students in my first grade class. So you never know. All right, final question.
Yes, my name is Marie Smith, and I was in one of the classes, not in the immediate integration of the schools. We'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary, class reunion this coming October. And I know all of the students that were integrated to schools at Stratford. And I want to say I just commend you for being so kind to them, because integration at the time was very scary to us. And those students are now gone on, and they are very successful professional people. I just want to let you know. And I am in touch with Gloria Thompson. And I'm from the Hawsville area.
Great. Thank you for that. Well, I think we learned about computers. We learned about the value of a loaf of bread, what it can do for you, the value of speaking up in the community, the value of living a long and healthy life. Martha Ann, thank you so much for sharing with us this afternoon. I think we all learned a lot.
I'm just glad I can do it.
Pardon me?
Just glad I can do it.
Just glad I can do it. I told my mother, who's 95, that she should be embarrassed. She hasn't written a book. We got 6 years.